Hi, today I'm in London with Brad Barry, Senior Odds Compiler and Risk Manager at Ladbrokes for some years, 15 years. So tell us to begin with, what did that job entail and how did you get there?
Well, how I got my interest in racing, probably like a lot of other people, my family weren't involved in racing, no, nothing along that lines. I was working in a restaurant when I was 18, and one of my best friends at the time, his father ran the seafood stall at Slough Dog Track. I think it was Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays. So if we went along with Bud, helped him unload the jellied eels and the cockles, we got a lift in, free entry and a lift home. And his seafood stall was at the apex of the last bend, so he was a fair old judge on the dogs, and so we used to go get in there for nothing and go round to the main ring, and it was just like a different world, having a £30 to 10 called Down to Friend by Dudley Roberts or something. You felt like you were part of an inner circle, and a couple of winners because Bud was a good judge. Stopped at the Dolphin on the way home, or the Double Century for a beer. So got through my interest, through greyhound racing initially. So I think it was the same year as the Ballyregan and Bob Skirlow Champ showdown at Wembley. And this was in a time when pubs and restaurants weren't open in the afternoon. They shut between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock. And so if I was working in the restaurant, you'd have that sort of 2-hour gap where there was nothing to do. Ended up in the betting shop sort of thing. Small betting shop in Garston, just outside Watford, a Ladbroke shop. Ended up punting in there. Decided one day that we were going to go to Ascot. First time I ever went racing. We'd had a last winner on the Thursday in the betting shop. And then we said, let's go to Ascot. First time I've ever been to the Royal Meeting in the Silver Ring. And I think, as so many people say, if your first experience of going is a successful one, then you're hooked for life. And we had no luck in the first 3 races. Last 3 races, it was Lester Piggott on Never So Bold. I think it's a King's Stand Stakes. Steve Corton rode a horse called Protection for the late Jim Joel. And then last race came along, and we had all that I'd won was probably about 100 quid in those days, which was a week's wages effectively, on a horse called Valuable Witness for Pat Edry, Jeremy Tree horse for the Niarchos family. And we must. It's funny, I remember the bookie I had the bet with, a guy called Gus O'Neill. I don't know how you remember things 30 years ago, so I couldn't tell you what I had for dinner last night, to be honest. What did I have for dinner last night? No, I genuinely couldn't tell you. But and we must have been 1.5, 2 furlongs out on the rail to see Pat Edry come past. I know you probably remember that horse. Fantastic stayer. So I was interested. That was it. I was, hooked for life. Got to a point where I thought, well, I was spending all my money in the betting shop. Maybe it'd be easier to go and try and get a job working in there than earning it in the morning and losing it in the afternoon. And an opportunity came up in that same betting shop that I'd been punting in, just to go and do a correspondence settling course as a trainee manager. I was marking the board in the old board marking in the town centre in Watford, and learnt to settle via they used to send you a list of questions. You'd fill them in, send them off, they'd send you back again, they'd mark them, you send them off, they'd send you back again. Unbelievably long-winded when you think about it now, but I could probably still settle an equally divided flag or something like that if the push came to shove and you gave me a pencil and paper and enough time. So sort of got my foot in the door there. Worked in the betting shop for a couple of years. I had a great supervisor at the time, a guy called John Murphy, and probably a lot of my progression in the company was down to him, because he could see I had an interest in racing. I was going racing every day on my day off. He said, why don't you try and price some races in the evening? So I used to be one of those guys that got the Timeform Black Book and the results from the Weekender and that kind of thing. Sat down and tried to, got the Sporting Life out and got my ruler and my black pen and marked off the runners for the next day, and tried to sit at home in the evening and price a couple of races, see how I compared to other the real prices and the real odds compilers the next day. So that sort of piqued my interest. He saw that I had an interest and said, look, why don't we try and see if we can get you a job at head office or a job in the trading department or something like that. And this guy John, he was friends with a chap called Peter Michaels, who was a well-respected and well-known odds compiler, and did a tissue for a lot of the industry. And I managed to get an interview with Mike Dillon for a job in PR, actually, as it was at the time. Went along to the interview. Be fair to say, it didn't go very well. I wasn't the type of person that Mike was looking for, but he could see I had an interest in racing, and I just got a job. I thought, let's try and get myself into the head office, get my foot in the door, and I got a job in PR for literally a month, worked in sales for 2 months, and then got seconded down into the trading room, what was then called the Operation Control Centre, which was where the bets and the business from the shops came into via the phones, and that was relayed into the trading room. So that was my sort of foot in the door in trading, as it were.
So you were there when, because I was working on course, well, just after that sort of time, and the money would come flooding in from Ladbrokes. I mean, were you there when those decisions were being made?
Where I was working at the time was next door to the dealing room, as it were. So that was where all of those decisions were made, in the dealing room. I moved from the Operation Control Centre in what was called anti-post. So that was a room that had like 5, 6 guys in sometimes at the most. And that's where the prices were actually compiled. So for advert races, and we would provide a form card every day between us. A guy called John Thompson, who was in charge then, who was like a doyen of the odds compilation and anti-post department. And I sort of, learnt at his master's knee, as it were, at the time. We would provide a card for trading. Trading would use that card, as many other things, and make those decisions as to the sort of business that would, be sent back down to the tracks.
Yeah, because people of a certain age won't know that back in those days there was only very few races priced up on the day-to-day racing. So you'd have marked the cards up for your own use,
yeah,
for reference against what there was actually going on course when the market became live.
Yeah, so we actually used to produce for each meeting, for each day, one of us would be assigned to that meeting the day before, and we would produce a card for every race with comments on and everything that was required for the dealing room. And the dealing room would use that card and the other knowledge that they were given, and they would make the decisions. And we'd price up the advert races for the next day, 2 or 3 or whatever it might be, depending on the meeting. And as you say, maybe 6, 8 races on the day of the events for early price business.
Right, so there you go, Brad. Price up the 3:30 at Newton Abbot tomorrow. Where'd you start?
Well, yeah, you start with the runners, and time form ratings would be the first thing we would look at. We, used the black book. I used either super form or race form. For me, I preferred super form. And you would make a decision on distance. Had the horse run over the distance before? Had it run at the track before? Ground was obviously a crucial factor. You look at its previous runs, and then you just build a pattern from as much information as you could decipher, and different people do it different ways. I used to try and work out what the shape of the race was, would be my first thing. So is it a 5-1 the field? Is it a 2-1 chance? What was it? Try and find out what price you think the favourite is in this kind of race. Not only price, but factoring in the jockeys and the trainers, and also knowledge of what the punters are likely to be looking for. So I'd start with the favourite, then look at those that you thought had no chance, and then the others fitted in between. I don't think there's any right way and wrong way. Everyone did it differently, but that would be how I'd start. That would be my sort of my starting base. If it was an early price race, more than one person would do it. So you might have 3 or 4 people pricing that race, and then you'd have the dreaded call over. And if you were the office junior, which I was, obviously when I first went in, you inevitably got shouted up, is your turn to give out your prices first. So you'd go down the card, 6-1, 8-1, and then the more senior guys would give their prices out. And if you were suddenly going along and you were under the odds everyone, you knew you was going to get to a point further down the card where you're going to say 5-1, and they're all going to go 3, 11-4, 5-2. So you sort of you were learning the hard way. But you're learning from these guys, and there were some great people in that office. John O'Connell, who is now a successful racing TV pundit. I sat next to Ed Chamberlain for a year while he was doing his BHA graduate course. He was in there, I was compiling. Paul Smith, Derek Smith's son, obviously, as you know. A lot of, well-known faces and well-known people passed through there at the time, all learning, from scratch, how you do it from the beginning kind of thing.
Right, so how much would it, you literally look at it and do it all on the figures, or would you say, oh, hang on a minute, he's a bit of a tricky dicky, we better go in a bit cautiously with that one, or would it all be just, these are the facts and figures, these are the prices?
You'd initially price it on the form. So it sounds quite antiquated now, but we used to literally have a video recorder set up on the TV, and it would be the office juniors chore to put the cassette tape in, and every single race was recorded. Piece of A4 paper on the little counter on the screen, writing down the numbers. So we had every race that was run every day had been recorded. So if we wanted to reference any of them, or if Mike Dillon came in and wanted to see something on one of the races, you could reference it, go back and look at it. So we would price it initially on just the form. Then you can add in your factor, well, this trainer does really well at this track. Like lots of people, trainers are creatures of habit. So you'll find a trainer has often run one of his best horses in this race previously, or they always use this race as a stepping stone for another race, so it might not be. And then you'd look at jockey bookings. Everyone would want to be with, Dunwoody or Maguire or whoever it might be at the time, Pat Hedry or Steve Cawthon. So, that's another factor that you'd take in. So you'd start with just the form, and then you'd put in all those other factors. And like you say, you get horses that people are just looking out for, jockey trainer combinations that people are looking out for. Mark Johnson at Goodwood or whatever it might be, so that it's always shaving a couple of points off or a point off, but at the same time balancing it percentage wise with the other runners.
So a bit surprised there. So even back in the early days, the races were recorded, so you had access. Most people would have had access to videos, would they?
No, we recorded every single race. It was a laborious task. Whoever was sitting nearest the TV.
Yeah, but even for like off meetings at Newton Abbot or something like that, would that all be recorded?
If it was on record, if we could see it, we would record it.
Got you. So so before it would have all been just on the form, the same as everybody else in the unless it was. Got you. Okay. So fast forward into modern times, obviously, most people assume that skills accrued by guys like you are pretty much worthless now, because the night before somebody goes up on the machine and then the market starts to settle down, and it appears to the general public, the betting public, as if all you do is look down through and see the Betfair prices and add a bit of margin and then go with that. How true is that?
Well, I'll be honest with you, I've been out of horse racing odds compilation for a considerable number of years. I was much more involved in sports betting for the majority of the last 15-20 years. So how they do that now, I couldn't give you a 100% accurate answer. It certainly wasn't something, Betfair wasn't around and the exchanges weren't around when I was doing horse racing. So but as far as sports betting is concerned, it does have a massive effect. It does make a massive difference. It's why you see the same set of prices from every firm on something like a test match coming up. If it's 2.5 England on Betfair, there's not going to be any bookmakers of a 13-8. It's as simple as that. It had a massive effect and still does, definitely.